In 2024, the Big 12 proved itself to be the most exciting conference in all of college football. You saw nail-biting finishes, Heisman-level performances,
and it's time to strike another pose for Travis Hunter.
And teams proving the doubters wrong all season long.
Arizona State's the Big 12 champions.
How do you top a season for the ages? The road to glory begins here. It is the 2025 Big 12 football schedule reveal show, and it starts right now. Welcome to Inside the 12's reveal of the Big 12 Conference's 2025 football schedule. I'm Pete Souza. He is LD McClain, a man who knows a little something about the Big 12. Great to have you.
Glad to be here, Pete. Got to get going.
Can't get the schedule reveal started any sooner. Over the next hour, we will give you a week-by-week look at each of the teams' schedule for the upcoming season. We even have an interview with the man in charge of putting the whole thing together. LD, the fans have been waiting. I'm ready. I know you're ready.
I've been waiting on it. Let's get going with it.
It goes back to grade school. We're going to go in alphabetical order. Even I can understand that. Let's kick it off with the Arizona Wildcats. There it is, their 2025 schedule. Last year, 4-8 under first-year coach Brett Brennan. They begin the season saying aloha. They welcome Hawaii to Tucson, and you see the Kansas State matchup on September 13th. That is actually not a conference game. This was agreed upon prior to Arizona joining the Big 12. BYU on October 11th, and you can't take your eyes off that finish at Arizona State. A whole lot going on for Arizona. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to touch on with you, LD, they don't leave home for about a month. How important is that for them to generate some confidence at that home slate?
Man, that is critical because as a team, as you're getting prepared in the season, if you could sleep in your own bed the night of the game, that's always going to be an advantage. So they've got an opportunity to get off with the jump with 3 possible wins. And if you can build that momentum before you get to 9-13, obviously Kansas State, where the meat and potatoes of their schedule starts to go, you're looking at head coach Brett Brennan and saying, hey, we've got an opportunity to get a lot of momentum early in the year and see if we can keep it going late in December if you can.
What else jumps out at you when you look at this Wildcats?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. You know, playing Kansas, playing Cincinnati, you know, those are 2 teams that are not typically on their radar. I think that's going to be interesting for them this season. And again, it's all about when you travel. Who are they playing, right? You've got Cincinnati in November, that Friday night game on the road against Arizona State, which is an arch rival. That could be pivotal for these guys, and we'll see how this thing develops for sure.
Yeah, and as the new Big 12 continues to come together, Arizona's first ever meeting against a team like Cincinnati. So exciting to see these teams re-engage. You mentioned Arizona State and Arizona, and engage for the first time, Cincinnati and Arizona.
Yeah, I think that's good for college football, right? You want to see some of these matchups that you don't typically get to see. We always used to have to wait for the bowl season, right, to get some of these awkward matchups sometimes like this, but I think this is fantastic now that you've got these programs going head-to-head with one another.
Tell you who I can't wait to see this year, Arizona State. How do they respond, right, after a dynamite season? Big 12 champs, 11-3. Their first game at home against Northern Arizona. But after that, it gets interesting. Mississippi State, a team who they beat last year in a close game, and then Texas State, a gritty Texas State team. They beat them on the road last year. They'll welcome them to Tempe this year. That's a difficult game. We already mentioned the Arizona game, that rivalry. Cannot wait to see that on both sides. And then Baylor. Baylor comes up. They travel to Waco on September 20th. That's a difficult start for Arizona State, but it also could be viewed, if you've got the perspective going, that it's an opportunity for them to get a good jump.
And see, I look at it from a different lens. When you see that SEC team, Mississippi State, you said, okay, here we go. This is a juggernaut. Let's keep in mind the Bulldogs only won 2 or 3 games last season. And when the 2 teams played a year ago, they did hold the Bulldogs to 27 total yards rushing in the entire game, and they led 27-3. So that game's a little distorted. However, it's still an SEC opponent. You still have to travel. I still think Arizona State could start the season out 4-0. And when they get to that TCU game, a really solid TCU team under Sonny Dykes, that's where the rubber will start to meet the road, I think, for the Sun Devils as they try to go back and repeat as Big 12 champs.
Cam Scottaboo is gone. You lose him to the NFL. Sam Levitt returns, and most importantly, head coach Kenny Dillingham returns, and he could have run for governor of the state of Arizona.
You.
Probably would have won every place but Tucson, but you get the idea. An extremely popular figure out there in the land of the desert.
Well, Coach Dillingham has got a culture built, right? So now in this era of football to where you're not building programs for the long term, you're starting to build them season by season. Again, they're going to plug and play, right? This is a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. If they can stay there with Coach Dillingham, look for them to repeat to get back to the Big 12 championship.
And Big 12 nut job fans like me cannot wait to see that November 1st game against Iowa State. That's a rematch that we are all cannot wait to see.
Absolutely. And if you look at the Cyclones, they are licking their chops to get back at the Sun Devils. And so, yes, that's going to be very intriguing. The timing of that game is going to be fantastic. You're looking at November is when that game is going to come out. So weather could be at that time a little bit of a factor. So we'll see how tough they are coming that time of year as well.
Yeah, we'll also find out how tough they are early in the season, like we mentioned, when they head to take on Baylor. 2024, a great finish for the Bears. They finished 8-5 overall. This was after Dave Aranda and his team got out to a slow start. But it starts off early. We talk about opportunities to get your team to a place where they want to be early in the season. It starts with Auburn. Auburn comes to Waco. The Tigers have gotten a lot better as far as recruiting is concerned. Only had 2 wins last year. That could be a tough game. But how about SMU, a college football playoff team? Baylor takes to the road. Short trip up 35. And then you see Arizona late in the season, UCF there in the later stages. The back end of Baylor's season could be considered manageable.
Well, if you look at this, 4 of the first 6 games of the season are at home for the Baylor Bears, which is critical because they were awesome at McLean Stadium a year ago, 5-1 to be exact. They had that 6-game winning streak, so Dave Aranda has his team capable of getting in the rhythm midseason and then carrying them into the postseason. SMU obviously riding high on the CFP. Yeah, make no mistake about it. They're gearing up for that for that game too, aside from Auburn as well.
And more on that SMU game coming up later, but you have to look at Arizona State as well. 3 of Baylor's first 4 games, you mentioned, you look at it, could be a really tough schedule. Also, a launching point for Baylor, possibly to get into that top 25 early on and stay there as the season unwinds. And they end with in-state rival Houston. Keep an eye on Dave Aranda and the Baylor Bears. They've returned Sawyer Robertson, Bryson Washington, and Josh Cameron. That's a team you got to be ready for.
Well, I think the Big 12 has certainly turned into that conference that's physical, right? Arizona State showed us that. Baylor Bears are built to be physical, right? Coach Aranda makes no mistake about it. They want to be physical on the offensive and defensive lines. And you mentioned some of the skilled players, if they can, and the recruiting coming in, right? They've got the arsenal to certainly compete. Now they just got to go out there and feed off of what they've done a year ago and keep that momentum going.
All right, let's go to the Cougars. We head to Provo, BYU. 2024, they were 11-2. Great season, but Kalani Sitake is very excited that he gets L.J. Martin back and he gets Jake Retzloff back. They start things off week 1 against Portland. You see Colorado September 27th, TCU on the 15th. You look at a schedule like this, LD. You also have a game against Stanford. That's the second game. Big 12 opponents play, or the Big 12 Conference plays 7 ACC opponents overall. Stanford early in the season for BYU. About this schedule, what jumps out at you?
Well, I think the key games to me, obviously Colorado, the rematch of the bowl game. You've got the Holy War against Utah. Iowa State, let's keep an eye on that game. I think that is going to be pivotal, especially at the time of year when they play. That could tilter either team towards certainly making the Big 12. And when you look at TCU, obviously Texas Tech, I don't know what it is about going to Lubbock. But Lubbock at night, Lubbock anytime during the day, weird things tend to happen, and good teams struggle from time to time going out there and playing. Coach McGuire and his guys. Look, I like this team. They're built physical. They were the #1 overall defense, #1 defense in scoring. If they can get back to that level, no matter where they play, their game is going to travel. I think the Cougars will certainly be at the top again.
How about the Holy War, October 18th? Last year, it was a 1-point win for BYU. Utah wants revenge. Yeah. We're going to talk about it later when we get into the Utes. But that is a game that all of Utah has circled on the calendar.
Yeah, you know, looking back at that game, Utah didn't have their best season of the year. They weren't playing their top ball, but they still were in that game. And Make no mistake about it, it was come down to a penalty that kind of changed the tide of the game. But that is going to be one where I think the reloading of Utah and then, of course, BYU coming back with their squad, that is going to be a game of epic proportions for sure.
It's funny, you mentioned the cliche. Throw the records out, but I'm telling you, that is a game, right?
You have to.
You throw the records out. Plenty more to come on our first look at the 2025 Big 12 football schedule. Colorado and Iowa State both had double-digit win season. Can they do it again? We dive into their schedules and more when Inside the 12 returns. Welcome back to Inside the 12 and your first look at the 2025 Big 12 football schedule. He is LD McClain. I am Pete Souza. It is our privilege to walk you through this schedule. We're going to start running right now. We get to Cincinnati, the Bearcats. 2024, they were 5-7. Week 1, hey, they start off with a bang. A Thursday night game in Kansas City against Nebraska. I mean, that is something that just jumps out at you. 4-14 is Cincinnati in the conference since joining the Big 12. Opportunities to improve upon that number start with Kansas in September. That's September 27th. Right after that, you go to Iowa State. Late in the season, you got to circle BYU, and also you wrap up with TCU. What jumps out to you as far as this Cincinnati slate is concerned?
You know, when you first look at this schedule, obviously we talked about Nebraska, but I think the 4 out of their 6 games up front are at home. That's a key thing, right? So you're going to get most of these tough games. Iowa State, I know everybody's talking about Iowa State, which respectfully so. You've got them at home. You've got BYU at home, and you've got Baylor at home as well. So that's the thing to me, and that's going to be the theme throughout this entire show is which one of these teams has the right type of scheduling for home games either early in the season or late in the season, and that typically can carry a team like the Bearcats that's kind of under the radar a chance for them to make a push late in the season.
They got off to a hot start last year. They were 5-2. They beat Arizona State. I mentioned overall their body of work in the Big 12, 4-14. You can flush that and start brand new this year, and you have an opportunity to get going. Really exciting time to be a Bearcat fan.
No, I think so too. They struggled on the road. They were 2-4 on the road, but now they've got some opportunities to get right. They've got some teams that, you know, looking at this, yes, they've got to go to Utah, and yes, they finish in Fort Worth against TCU, which is going to be a very difficult game, but again, it's all going to be predicated on how they start the season. They've got a chance to get right going into that Kansas game, 9-27 in Iowa State and in UCF. They've got a really good chance to build that momentum, and that's the key for all of these teams, momentum going late in the year.
You find a way to beat Nebraska, you could be going into Kansas September 27th, 3-0.
And like we talked with Scott, right, it's confidence, right? If you can beat a team like that, that is confidence, and that can carry you throughout the rest of the year for sure.
Hey, speaking of confidence, Coach Prime, baby.
Hey, let's
go.
go.
Buffs, 2024, they were 9-4, 7-2 in conference, an electric start to the season last year, and they kept it rolling all year long. Coach Prime, it's going to be the first season he ends up playing without his 2 sons as a head coach in college football. Longest stretch of games to start the season. They have 7 games before they get a bye. They begin with Georgia Tech. Talk to me about the conference slate. What jumps out at you there?
Well, if you look at this, they were really good at Boulder last year. They were 5-1 at home. That's a key, right? And look how their schedule shapes up for these guys, right? You got 5 out of the first 7 games at home. That's a big deal, right? And if you look at it as a team that is trying to get the student body involved, you've got that atmosphere as some of these teams start to travel in. That is a huge thing for Coach Prime and his crew. They're going to have obviously a new quarterback. You know, it's either going to be Jaden Salter, it's either going to be Julian Lewis, who we don't know. But make no mistake about it, they're going to be ready, locked and loaded there in Boulder.
Well, you mentioned Colorado, and you know they lose guys, right? You lose Shador, you lose Shiloh. But it's back like when Deion was a player at FSU, right? You don't really recruit, you reload.
You just reload.
And that's what it looks like when you look at their roster and the players that have come over, whether it's recruiting or the portal. Looks like it could be a really good season for Colorado. Don't expect too much of a letdown there.
No, I think the way they've ended the season and lost against BYU in the playoffs, I think that left a bitter taste. You know how it is. If you don't finish the season on a win, boy, that propels you in the offseason. And so, again, with this schedule, I think it is very favorable for these guys of how they can certainly make a run and get right back in the mix of a Big 12 championship appearance, perhaps.
And you mentioned 5 of those first 7 games at home. Their bye week coming week 8, so they'll have a little bit of time to get on a roll and get some momentum going. How about Houston? Willie Fritz, season number 2. They were 4-8 last year. They really surged towards the end of the year. They open week 1 with Stephen F. Austin, then they go to Rice, but then it gets real interesting. You see Colorado, then Texas Tech on the 4th, Oklahoma State on the 11th. They wrap up with Baylor on November 29th. You look at this Houston schedule, where do they have an opportunity to make an impact early?
Well, if you look at it, there is obviously an even amount of grade out here on the road. They were not good on the road, 1-5 last year. So Willie Fritz has got to go back to the cupboard. An offense that only scored 14 points a game. Hear me out when I say this. They have to win Texas. They play 5 teams from the state of Texas that they are highly capable of winning. Now, TCU, Texas Tech, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for sure. But if they can win those games, that's 5 wins, Pete. That puts them ahead of what they did last year. And then you sprinkle in some of these other games. Now, Oregon is going to be obviously tough. Colorado, obviously playing them at home, is going to be very, very tough. Arizona State, like we mentioned. But they got a chance to improve here and certainly make some noise in the Big 12.
Yeah, they got that Oregon State game on the 27th of September. But they wrap up, you mentioned the Texas teams, TCU and Baylor. They'll have an opportunity early to prove themselves and late.
Yeah, and that's what you look for. And to think about the Texas teams and the way you talked about how they finish, that's a rivalry, right? Because all these kids kind of know each other in the state of Texas. They've been recruited. They've been on the same recruiting trips in the state of Texas. So how it falls again for the Cougars is, again, another one of these teams that you got to get good while the getting is there. Because if you don't, you're going to be up against it trying to beat a solid team like an Arizona State. West Virginia, obviously, that's going to be a tough team coming in, the Mountaineers. You're going to be in those situations that you don't want to get in late in the season like that.
And don't get it twisted. There were some recruiting wars over this Texas recruit back in the day. All right, next up we go to Iowa State. A lot to be excited about if you're a Cyclone fan. Last year you had your first 11-win season. You make the Big 12 championship game. You were 1 game away from the college football playoff. Of course, the Iowa game, everybody's fired up for that. How about Ireland? They play Kansas State. Now, that is what was a home game for Kansas State. So Iowa State doesn't lose a home game playing there, playing the Wildcats, but the Cyclone faithful has to be super charged up for that. November 1st, your rematch with Arizona State. That is going to be one that everyone in the country is going to be looking at, especially the folks in Ames.
Yeah, I look at this schedule. This is the one where I kind of actually scratch my head. They've got 3 byes. It's one of 3 teams in the Big 12 that actually has 3 byes. It takes away their rhythm. And if you know this, Pete, playing football, you kind of got to get into a rhythm and start to play. And if you look at how the schedule is shaped out, I think they have the absolute toughest schedule in the Big 12, not from a standpoint of logistics, but a standpoint they've got the bullseye on their back, right? I think it's one of these games one of these teams that it's going to be a landmine every single step of the way, and especially after that second bye where you're sitting there playing some of the toughest teams in the conference, obviously, as well. But I think it's going to be a real tough challenge when you go Colorado, then BYU. Man, that is tough. And then you're going to have a break at some point in time in between all of this towards the end of the year. So that is a tough one in my opinion.
You get that bye before the last 2 games. Then you have Kansas, and then you have Oklahoma State. Real good news for the Cyclones. Hey, Matt Campbell, he's not the head coach of the Bears. He's the head coach of Iowa State. After getting interest from pretty major organizations, he is staying put in Ames, and you got Rocco Becht back. They're in pretty good shape, but I really like your note. This could be the toughest schedule in all of the Big 12.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, we are just getting started here on Inside the 12. First look at the 2025 Big 12 football schedule. Happy to be a part of it with you. Kansas State looking to build on their impressive 9-win season, while the Oklahoma State Cowboys are desperate to bounce back. Their schedules and more when we return. Welcome back to Inside the 12's 2025 Big 12 football schedule reveal. I'm Pete Souza. He is LD McClain, the eye of the storm of many recruiting battles in the state of Texas back in the day. I'll tell you, this feels like Christmas in February.
Yeah.
And I get a little frustrated because we still got to wait till August.
I know, isn't that the kind of the sorry side of it a little bit? It's bittersweet a little bit. You got to kind of wait for it. But it's always good to talk football. It just proves it's a 24 all-year-round sport for sure.
24/7, 365. Let's go to the Kansas Jayhawks. 5-7 last year, but that does not tell the story. Lance Leipold's team was one of the more difficult in the country to face. I said last year, if you saw Kansas on your schedule late, it was like The Wire. Omar coming. You did not want to see Kansas coming your way. They're a Week 0 opponent. They start against Fresno State. Week 2, border war, rivalry game against Mizzou. And you look at the schedule, Iowa State on the 22nd of November. What else jumps out at you, LD?
Well, when you look at this for a team that went 4-2, despite their overall record, they did go 4-2 at home. The 4 of their first 5 games are at home. That's going to be a benefit for the Jayhawks. Now, when you look at this schedule, they are one of 3 teams that has 3 byes. To me, that is just, it blows my mind because, again, it takes away from building some sort of rhythm as a football team. You play well a couple of weeks, you stop. You play again, you stop. You play again, you stop. So to me, I think that is going to be very paramount for this football team to really have a mature group. And they've got a lot of experience coming back to really hone in and take literally one game at a time this season.
So those 3 byes, you feel like it's almost more beneficial to keep the rhythm going?
Yeah, again, it's all kind of relative right now. If you're playing bad, you don't want to sit there and say, hey, let's keep it going. You might need to take a stop. It is good for guys getting healthy. But look at this last stretch of the season right here. You've got Arizona, you've got Iowa State, and then you go back on the road on a Friday night game against Utah. And we know different things, weird things can happen in Utah, certainly at night. So, again, I just think this is a very difficult schedule. Again, one of 3 teams with 3 byes.
Yeah, you can't take your eyes off that October 25th, Kansas State. That is an absolutely huge game. They get to play that at home. Good news.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, too. A 16-game losing streak, obviously, to the Wildcats. That's a big thing for the Jayhawks. So they've got to really hone in and lock in and get ready. But again, the week before you play Texas Tech, how are you going to do that? Then you've got to get ready. We don't know what Oklahoma State's going to be this year, but again, that is going to be a tough game as well.
Look forward to seeing this Kansas team in action. How about Kansas State? 9-4 last year. Huge game to start off the season. Iowa State in Ireland. We talked a little bit about that travel. Got to be tough to pack your bags and start the season off overseas, but there's also an anticipation and excitement around it.
Man, it is always tough to travel. The logistics that go into that as a common football fan, you really don't know, but as former players, we understand you got to get ready a couple of nights before. Now, they're going to Ireland. That's going to be a long trip, but again, it is a tough game. But aside from that, when they do get back to the States, they've been really good at home. They've been 5-1 on the season. Again, I think the one non-conference game, if I may mention it, the Army Black Knights will not be an easy out. That is going to be a bloodbath. That is going to be a very physical game. But again, they are very good at Manhattan. I think the way the schedule lines out for these guys with their quarterback Avery Johnson, I think they've got a chance to really shock some folks and get back to that level with Coach Kleiman at the helm. And this is a team I don't think you want to play late in the year, especially when they finish with Colorado.
And you see that Arizona game on the schedule, by the way. Check it out right there, 9-13.
Yeah.
That is a non-conference game. It was agreed upon before Arizona joined the Big 12.
Yeah.
A lot of opportunity, though, with Avery Johnson at the helm. Chris Kleiman's got to be looking forward to this season.
Well, Chris Kleiman builds his team for the road, right? He builds his team physical. It's in the trenches. They want to run the football. They want to play defense. Those types of things travel on the road here. When you have to go to Kansas, obviously, when you have to go to Oklahoma State late in the year, Utah, again, I referenced the timing of these games on the road because that could make or break how you finish getting into the bowl game or even the Big 12 championship.
Final 3 games, you see Oklahoma State, Utah, and Colorado at home. That's who they finished with. They beat the Buffs on the road last year in such an exciting game. And by the way, all is right with the college football world because Mike Gundy has renegotiated his contract. He is back with Oklahoma State. Let's head to Stillwater. A ridiculously disappointing year. Everyone can agree on that. Last season for the Cowboys, 3-9, 0-9 in conference play. A chance to get right when they play Baylor on the 27th. After 3 non-conference games, you can't overlook the second one. We want to talk about conference games, but you play Oregon. That game is on the road in week 2. How does that test the Cowboys early?
That's going to be an early test. We're going to see are the Cowboys back to what we known them to be under Coach Mike Gundy. Now, they do get a reprieve after Oregon, right? They get the bye, and then you've got 4 out of your next 5 games at home, right? Tulsa, that's an in-state rivalry game. You got Baylor. That Arizona game, that's going to be very intriguing for them. And then they've got Houston and then Cincinnati. And then it kind of gets almost down to the usual suspects when you get Tech, you've got Kansas. That stretch to finish now, they got to find a replacement at quarterback. They got to find a running back. Ollie Gordon's gone. So, again, it's going to come down to can they plug and play and get back to the level we know the Cowboys to be.
Well, and you hope, if you're the Oklahoma State Cowboys, you can get off to a fast start to kind of flush last season and some of those woes. But when you get late in the season, you have Kansas State, you have UCF, and you wrap up with Iowa State.
Yeah.
That's going to be a tough game. You know that.
And it's going to be a very tough game. At that moment of year, a lot can be decided by that game in the Big 12. Iowa State could be very well be playing just to get, points as far as the CFP goes. They could be locked in already for the Big 12 championship. We don't know that, but speculation can prove. So these games critical for Oklahoma State to finish strong. Kansas State, UCF, and Iowa State at the end of the year.
I cannot wait to see how the Cowboys respond this year with Mike Gundy and his squad. I'm sure they are ready to go. Next up, TCU. Sonny Dykes and his squad, 9-4 last year. I'm calling it a sneaky 9-4. You looked up and you said, hey, Horned Frogs won 9 games, 6-3 in the conference. Week 1, a non-conference game against who else? Bill Belichick. They go to play on the new natural grass in Chapel Hill, but they aren't talking about the new natural grass there. They're talking about Bill Belichick. That's a game with a lot of hype around it. Week 4, you have SMU at home, but then you hit the road to Tempe to take on that tough Sun Devil squad.
Well, again, this schedule is set up around the Ponies early this season. Just like we talked about Baylor, well, they're circling the Ponies for SMU here. But when you start at North Carolina, you got a chance with Abilene Christian. The meat and potatoes of their schedule starts after the SMU game when you've got the Sun Devils, you've got Colorado, you've got Kansas State. We are going to find out really quick if Sonny Dykes and his team is back to the – and I agree with you, that sneaky 9 wins. I'm sitting there looking back at that like they did win 9 games. How is that going to play out? Will it carry over? If I know Sonny Dykes, he's an excellent coach. He will have his guys prepared early in the season against North Carolina, but trending the right way going into that stretch starting with Arizona State.
First time in 50 years they take on the Sun Devils. What else about the TCU schedule excites you?
Well, when you look at it from a whole, again, it's all about the finish, right? You're going to have to go on the road to play BYU. You get a Houston team that's trying to get up, but then you finish with Cincinnati. Cincinnati is kind of an unknown right now. So they could have a good stretch, again, starting with Iowa State, BYU, Houston, and then Cincinnati. That is going to dictate where these guys finish. Is it going to be an 8-win team, 9-win? Can they get to double digits at 10 wins this season?
When Inside the 12 returns, we talk to the man responsible for putting it all together. Big 12 Chief Football and Competition Officer Scott Draper joins us to share how the conference gets it done. That and more when we come back. This special edition of Inside the 12 rolls on with our reveal of the 2025 Big 12 football schedule. He is LD McLean. I'm Pete Souza. Joining us now, giving us some insight and background on how this whole crazy thing comes together, Big 12 Chief Football and Competition Officer Scott Draper. Scott, thank you so much for joining us on such a celebrated day.
I'm so happy to be here and glad you guys are doing this. Look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, well, part of the conversation and part of the curiosity for LD and I and for fans everywhere, really the basics. How is the schedule made and how does it come together?
Well, really the process starts today for next year's schedule. So we've been working on the 2025 schedule really since last year, and you sequence of the games in, the non-conference games in, and ensuring that those are in the right places. And then really we turn our attention to the conference games, the 72 conference games that we have the ability and the responsibility to schedule. That process begins with the matrix, and the matrix is who plays who and where. That's set for 4 years. We released that a couple of years ago, and then you take that matrix and plug them in to the sequencing, which is when those games are played. And we have a set of parameters that we have to live by within our league, and we just do the very best we can to make sure that we balance the schedule competitively, we balance the schedule from a travel perspective, and then finally deliver as best we can for our television partners, ensuring that our best games are in our best windows so that most people can see it. So that's the process. It is a long and tedious process for sure. Lots of conversation with our members, lots of conversation with our broadcast partners, ultimately to get to a product that we share with our schools that you get to see today.
I know LD has a question coming up, but the whole time I thought the Matrix was Lawrence Fishburne and Keanu Reeves. I was wrong.
I'm bringing it back.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott, in the Big 12, you played 9 conference games. You with 16 teams. How does the Big 12 decide which schools play one another? I've always been curious about that.
Yeah, so that's the matrix. We started that process when the league grew by 4 2 years ago. We have a small working group of athletic directors, and we get in a room and we discuss what parameters we want, how often folks should play each other. Of course, in a matrix, not everybody can play each other over a 4-year period. We decide which games we'll play annually. We have 3 of those. And then we discuss, because of the footprint of our league, how important travel is in any particular year. So not burdening one particular program to play a handful of games outside of their time zone. So you have those conversations. You work with a really, really good scheduling person who I always talk about scheduling is just a math problem, and solving that math problem and making sure it's equal over a 4-year period. A lot of data, a lot of metrics that go into that discussion. Get our scheduling group to feel good about it, and then we present it to our full group to vote on, and then that's what we work for. That's the blueprint to which we build it each year, and we're in year 2 of that blueprint and 2 more to go.
Yeah, you kind of piggybacked off of my next question. I was going to talk to you about the travel. Being a former athlete, traveling is such a big deal. How does it factor who travels so much at a certain time, who travels less at a certain time, who's playing certain games in the time of the year? How does that all factor, if you can elaborate there?
Well, we really start with, on the travel perspective, we really start with those teams that have to travel 2 time zones out of their own time zone, right? So you identify those games. And West Virginia has 2 of them, BYU and Arizona State this year. So making sure that they have some balance across their travel, across their schedule, to make sure that they're not having those games back to back, for example, and trying as best as possible in years that there are 2 byes, which is this year. Each team has 2 byes in the season. 3 teams have 3 byes because of week 0 games. Using those byes to our advantage to balance the travel across time zones. And years that we don't have that, it'll be a different solution. But we try to, as best as we can, ensure that those teams that are going to play outside their time zone, that those games aren't stacked up against each other, or in a certain part of the year where travel is difficult. So without significant rest on the backside. So that's intentional on our part, and it makes it easier when you have 2 byes in the year.
This conversation, this show, it gets me very excited for the celebration that is college football. And the celebration starts week 0 in Ireland, Iowa State and Kansas State. How in the world do you go about facilitating that as far as logistics are concerned?
Well, I give credit to both schools. They had, for them to do it, it's a really big lift for them. Obviously, it's a conference game. It's Kansas State's conference game, so they had to take a game out of their stadium and take it to Ireland. And the response to the game on both campuses has been remarkable. I expect it to be a great football game, as always, no matter where it is in the schedule. But having the unique nature of it to start really to kick off the college football season in Ireland with a really, really good conference game. I can't wait for that game. I'm looking forward to seeing the stadium, looking forward to seeing the reaction of the fans and the players when they strap it up in August. But it's an effort that the league, both schools, the operator, Aer Lingus, all of the partners involved make it happen. And for us to be able to be a part of it, something that as a league we're going to do more of, and we want to do more of in the future. But excited for that game for sure.
Scott, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Next time, you got to promise we get a look at your room where we can see that pyramid chart like you're ready to crack a mob case wide open back then.
Anytime, my friend, anytime.
All right, Scott, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. Awesome. Insightful, entertaining. We've got to take a quick time out, but don't go anywhere. We have 4 more Big 12 football schedules to go, including 2 teams who will enter the 2025 season with new but familiar faces in charge. UCF, West Virginia, and more when Inside the 12's 2025 football schedule reveal returns. The party rolls on. We are back on Inside the 12. It is your first look at the 2025 Big 12 football schedule. I'm Pete Sousa. He is LD McClain, here to help you mark up those calendars. It has been our pleasure, and we continue. We got 4 teams left. It continues with Texas Tech. 8-5 last year for Joey McGuire's Red Raiders. They start the season with a stretch of non-conference games, and then you see it all begins with the Utes and then Houston. LD, what jumps out at you?
Well, I love the fact that the first 3 games of the season for Coach McGuire and his team is at home, right? That's an added benefit to, I don't care who you play. That's a huge thing. But then it gets to a tough stretch where they've got some of the tougher games. They've got them on the road. They've got Arizona State. They've got Kansas State. Then they finish with a game that I don't know what to make of the Mountaineers, but I know going to play them at their place is always going to be difficult. But again, if you look at how this team, they finished with 8 wins. That's another sneaky team with wins, by the way. If you look at how they finished, there are a tough, gritty team that can travel wherever they play. And I'm excited to watch these guys and get back. And again, I think when they've got, Kansas at home, they've got Oklahoma State, they got BYU at home. I think that is going to be critical, getting some of the tougher little teams that they match up against a little bit off at their own place.
What sneaks up on you about this schedule when you look at it?
Well, I think for the simple fact that they've got to be careful with some of these non-conference games. If you remember last year, it took a Herculean effort at the end against Abilene Christian. They won like 50-plus points in that game, 50 to 54, if I'm not mistaken.
It was dicey.
It was tight. It was tight. So again, you've got to make sure you take care of business. They do have Oregon State there. So that is one that you cannot overlook, trying to get momentum into conference play. So again, I'm anxious to see how they start off and how they can continue that trend going into some of the tougher games late in the year against BYU, and then on the road to West Virginia.
First time in almost 50 years that Joey McGuire and the Red Raiders, Joey McGuire, obviously a former Baylor coach and assistant under Matt Rule and Dave Aranda, they will not face off this year. That's one of those things we're dealing with now as we move into the new age.
Yeah, Pete, I think that's just what we're dealing with in college football this year, but we just roll with it and see how the thing plays out at the end of the year.
I'll tell you who rolled back into Orlando. Scott Frost. They got to be feeling good. The Knights, they start the season off non-conference. You see the Jacksonville State. You see right there North Carolina A&T. And then North Carolina, Bill Belichick taking a trip to Orlando. He's hopefully going to find out for UCF fans that it's not Disney World down there. How about BYU at the end of the schedule? That really jumps out at me. I turn it over to you. Any game in particular you're looking at?
Well, for a team that struggled on the road last year, they were 1-4. So again, for a team like that, trying to build out, Scott Frost is going to help them get back, hopefully, to that level. But I love the fact that the first 3 games are at home. Again, the last 3 games of the season, that is where we're going to find out if the Knights are who we potentially think they are. They've got Texas Tech on the road that they finish up with, obviously, BYU. That is a tough finish to me for a team that is trying to get their identity found out. But they got a chance to start off with some wins early in the season, and we're going to find out middle way when they play Kansas State, when they play Kansas back. Cincinnati, that's an interesting game. Different matchup there. West Virginia, we talked about that. Then they come and they play Baylor on the road. So we're going to find out real quick what the Knights are all about.
Now, as a player, dip back into your experience here. What's it like when you see so many tough road games on your schedule?
Well, as a team that you're trying to get an identity, you want to go on the road, actually, because that kind of galvanizes you to kind of we're against the world. So they've got great opportunities there, right? You see all the black here on the screen. Those are chances where you can kind of circle the wagons a little bit and get ready to go into season and try to get some wins.
This is a team, by the way, we're going to move on to Utah. A lot of folks look at their schedule, you got to be terrified because the Utes are out for blood this year. 5-7 last year. Disappointing, right? How about this? Week 1 non-conference game at UCLA. Then they have a home game against Cal Poly, and then they're at Wyoming, and then we are into the thick of the Big 12 slate, which starts with Texas Tech. And you see their next home game after Texas Tech in between West Virginia is Arizona State. That's got to be one folks are excited about in Utah.
Yeah, I think this is a interesting team. They struggled on the road last year, or at home, 2-4. But that first game against UCLA, how about that? Credit to both programs to schedule that game. And we're going to find out real quick, are the Utes who we think they are? Now, they do finish the season with 3 of their last 5 games on the road. I think with Coach Whittingham, the way he builds his program, we've seen it over the years, they are built to travel. And so it's going to be interesting when they have to go to Baylor and when they have to finish on Friday night. We've got a lot of Friday night finishes this year in the Big 12 against Kansas. So that's going to be interesting for sure, and I think they will be up for the task as a new season comes up.
You look at the schedule, right? October 18th, the Holy War. A gut-wrenching loss last year for the Utes. How excited are you for that one?
You know, that's always the game, and I think you mentioned it earlier, throw the records out, right? When you look at these two teams, and it's really two programs that are kind of mirrored one another. You know, it's in-state kind of thing, and so you get the vibe for that. But they've got to take care of business because as soon as they play BYU, guess who they got? They got Coach Prime and the Buffs next. And so you got to get ready. You got to get your mindset. That is so tough when you go up, but then you got to stay up the next week and continue that trend. That's always difficult.
You mentioned that's a tough close right there. Away at Kansas, preceded by a game at home against Kansas State. And I promise, I rarely try to say throw out the records, but it's true.
You got to throw it out. You have to.
You have to throw the records out. All right, West Virginia, another Back to the Future situation as Rich Rod returns. Last year they were 6-7 under Neil Brown, but you see 6 straight games to start the season. They start they start with 3 non-conference games. You have to talk about that backyard brawl against Pitt and then into the teeth of the Big 12, starting with the dangerous Kansas team. LD, what do you notice here?
Yeah, when you look at the schedule, the good thing about West Virginia, they do have the backyard brawl at their place, so that's good to get Pitt there. But, man, I'm telling you, the tougher games are on the road. They've got BYU. They've got Arizona State. Now, they do get Colorado at home, and that is going to be critical. But when you look at how their makeup, we'll find out real quick, will the speed option, triple option look from Rich Rodriguez, will that be an advantage to some of these teams earlier in the year as they try to finish with the tough Colorado, Arizona State, then Texas Tech at the end of the season? So it's going to be fun to watch the Mountaineers this year, and we'll see how it goes. 2
of those last 3 games at home against formidable opponents, right? You see a home game against Colorado, home game against Texas Tech, sandwiched in between Arizona State. That's a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, I think that's very difficult. I'm intrigued actually by the TCU game on October 25th because we know TCU is going to be ready. We'll see by that time, mid-year, are the Mountaineers who we think they are. And we're going to find out real quick with the different changes in philosophy that they play football this season.
So cool to have Rich Rod back, right? So cool to have Scott Frost back. Pretty cool situation. 16 up, 16 down. The 2025 Big 12 football season has no shortage of exciting games, storylines, and they also include some headline matchups to kick off the season. We take a look at those. The Big 12's hot start, that's what we're calling it, inside the 12, coming back after this. Welcome back to this special edition of Inside the 12. I'm Pete Souza. He is LD McClain. We have revealed all of the 2025 schedules for all 16 Big 12 teams. You got first-time matchups, you got rivalry renewals, and you got must-see showdowns. We are all looking forward to it, but we begin. By the way, we've lost our notes. No more notes. We're ready to zero in on some Week 0 matchups and Week 1 matchups, non-conference games, and some conference games, and you have to start with a conference matchup. We've been talking about it all show long. Iowa State and Kansas State in Ireland. Are you excited for the game, LD?
I am. I think that's going to be intriguing. I just think the whole setting of that game is going to be fantastic. It is tough traveling for teams to go that far, to be there that long, and then get back. The time changes could be an issue there as well.
Farmageddon takes to the road. Second one, we're looking at Cincinnati and Nebraska in Kansas City, a Thursday night showdown. My goosebumps. I got goosebumps getting ready for that one.
I think that's going to be fantastic. I think Matt Rule has the Cornhuskers trending the right way, and then they've got the fake Patrick Mahomes and Dylan Raiola at quarterback. I think he is phenomenal. That's a tough matchup for Cincinnati to start their year off as well.
Now, Auburn, who struggled last year, hits the road and comes to Waco. That game is on August 30th. Auburn's gotten better this offseason. I think that I saw last I checked, there were 6 overall in recruiting rankings. How does Baylor settle in against that team?
I think Baylor, the way they're building, we talked about it earlier, Coach Aranda, they're physical, right? You have to be physical no matter if it's the bottom of an SEC team or the top of an SEC team. You have to meet them in the trenches. I think the Baylor Bears match up well in this game. A lot of young players, great talent for Auburn. That's going to be an interesting game for sure.
Colorado and Georgia Tech. They shared the national title in 1990.
I remember that back in the day.
Oh,
Yeah,
Chad Brown, Eric Bieniemy,
Yeah,
right?
I love it.
We can't wait to see this game. Georgia Tech and Colorado on the 30th of August. Great way to start the year.
I think Georgia Tech is that team nobody wants to play. Ask Miami. Ask Florida State. At the beginning of last year when they traveled across in Europe as well and played. And so I think Colorado, they're going to get a tough test, a little bit different than when they started last year, but I think it's going to be interesting for sure.
One game that gained a lot of juice when Bill Belichick decided he was going to coach in college in North Carolina is TCU heading to Chapel Hill. That is a Monday night game, September 1st.
Sonny Dykes, Bill Belichick. I mean, you got that whole dynamic. You got TCU. They're kind of the, new reigning team. They've been a dominant team in the Big 12, and now North Carolina with the new regime coming in. It's everything you could ask for that week, and I'm going to be glued to the TV ready to watch it for sure.
I saw Coach Belichick said they got new grass in Chapel Hill at Kenan Stadium. They can't wait for that. The excitement from opening week will continue all year long here in the 12. That does it for our release of the 2025 Big 12 football schedule. Mark your calendars and also get your tickets. The season, it's going to be here before you know it. LD, great to have you, dude. It was a lot of fun.
Man. Awesome. It was a great time.
All right, make sure you're watching Inside the 12. You continue to do it. You can catch more Fridays on Inside the 12 at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Big 12 YouTube channel. And that's where we'll continue covering this Big 12 hoop season. For now, I'm Pete Souza. We'll see you next time.